The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining colony as Captain Kim Jae watched the workers begin their shift. New Seoul had been running smoothly for 3 years now, pulling precious metals from the rocky surface of Kepler 44 to B. The colony buzzed with activity as hundreds of humans went about their daily routines. Unaware that this would be their last normal day, Jay sipped his coffee and reviewed the daily reports on his tablet. Production was up 12% from last month. The new extraction equipment was working perfectly. Everything seemed peaceful. In their little corner of the galaxy, then the sky tore open. Massive, crystalline ships materialized from nowhere, their surfaces gleaming like living metal. They moved with predatory grace, completely silent as they descended toward the colony. Jay dropped his coffee cup as alarms began wailing throughout the settlement. "Oh, hands to emergency stations," he shouted into his communicator, his voice carrying across the entire colony network. This is not a drill. The alien vessels were unlike anything in human records. Their hulls seemed to breathe and pulse with organic life. As they drew closer, razor-sharp appendages extended from their sides. Cutting through the colony's defensive barriers like they were made of paper, Engineer Parkman rushed to his control station as explosions rocked the main power plant. "Captain, the shields are failing. Weapons are slicing through our hull plating like it's nothing." The first wave of attackers poured from the ships. They were tall, mantis-like creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the colony's burning lights. Each one carried weapons that seemed to be alive, pulsing with veins of green energy. These were the Veltar, and they had come to claim another world. Lieutenant Lita found herself in the residential sector when the attack began. Families were screaming and running as the alien soldiers advanced through the corridors. Her plasma rifle felt small and inadequate against the approaching threat. "Get the civilians to the transport ships," she yelled to her squad. "I'll hold them off." A Veltar warrior approached her, its blade arms extending like living swords. The weapon struck her across the chest, tearing through her combat armor as if it were cloth. The blade should have killed her instantly, but somehow Lita remained standing. Blood flowed from the wound, but not as much as there should have. She kept fighting, kept moving, even as pain shot through her body. The alien warrior seemed confused by her continued resistance. Its compound eyes studied her with what might have been surprise. Throughout the colony, similar scenes played out. Human defenders fell under the alien assault, taking wounds that should have been fatal. But many of them kept fighting, kept moving, kept protecting their people, even when they should have been dead. Sergeant Young Ho had been guarding the main evacuation route when a Veltar blade pierced his lung. He coughed up blood and stumbled, but his legs kept moving, his rifle kept firing. The alien toxins from the weapon should have shut down his nervous system within minutes. But Yang Ho continued coordinating the evacuation for another hour. "Transport 7 is loaded," called out through bloody lips. "Send them to the jump point." Dr. Choi Bin worked frantically in the medical center, treating wounded soldiers and civilians. What he saw defied everything he knew about human biology. People with massive blood loss were still conscious. Soldiers with severed arteries were still fighting. The human body was performing far beyond its supposed limits. "How are you still alive?" he asked a wounded miner who had taken a blade through the stomach. "Don't know, Doc," the man replied, helping to carry other injured people to safety. "Just feels like I can't give up yet." Captain Jay coordinated the evacuation from the command center, watching his people fall back to the transport ships. The colony was lost, but they could save lives. Through his security cameras, he watched the battle rage in the corridors below. The Veltar moved with mechanical precision, their living weapons cutting through human defenses. But something was wrong with their advance. Should have been over within minutes, but the humans kept fighting back. Wounded soldiers who should have died were still shooting. Civilians who should have collapsed were still running. "Transport 1 through 5 are away," reported Communications Officer Nam Su. 6 and 7 are loading now. Jay watched the last groups of survivors making their way to the remaining ships. The Veltar had expected quick surrender after their overwhelming display of force. Instead, they were facing continued resistance from beings who refused to die when they should. as the final transport lifted off. Jay caught sight of the alien commander through the command center's reinforced windows. The creature's compound eyes seemed to show uncertainty, perhaps even concern. This was not how their conquests usually went. The last thing Jay saw before the command center exploded was that look of confusion in the alien's eyes. The Veltar had conquered dozens of worlds. They had never encountered anything like humanity's stubborn refusal to simply lie down and die. The colony of New Sol fell that day. But the seeds of something unexpected had been planted. Veltar had won their battle. But they had also discovered that humans were far more resilient than their intelligence had suggested. This would not be the easy conquest they had planned. 3 months had passed since the fall of New Sol, and Dr. Choibin found himself in a place he never expected to be. The Veltar research facility was cold and sterile, with walls that seemed to breathe like living tissue. He was one of hundreds of human prisoners being studied like insects under a microscope. The alien scientists were confused, and their confusion was growing into something that looked like fear. Subject exhibits continued metabolic function despite 70% blood loss. Al, the lead researcher, spoke into its biorecorder. The creature's forearms moved constantly as it took notes, its compound eyes never leaving the humans strapped to the examination table. Ben watched as they brought in another test subject. It was Sergeant Young Ho, the same man who had taken a blade through his lung during the colony attack. According to every medical textbook Ben had ever read, Young Ho should have died within minutes of that injury. Dead, he had kept fighting for hours before finally being captured. Your cardiovascular system is remarkable. The Veltar scientists communicated through its translation device. Our intelligence data was completely wrong about human durability. The alien poked at Yang Ho with various instruments, clearly frustrated by what it was seeing. The sergeant's lung had somehow sealed itself around the wound. His blood was carrying oxygen more efficiently than should have been possible with such damage. "How long have you been studying us?" Ben asked. The creature's eyes turned toward him. 3 months. "We have tested over 400 of your species. The results make no sense." Meanwhile, scattered across the occupied worlds, something was happening that the Veltar had never seen before. Human survivors were not just hiding and waiting to die. They were organizing, adapting, and most importantly, they were getting stronger. Captain Kim Jae floated in the cramped quarters of an asteroid mining station, now serving as a resistance command center. Reports were coming in from across human space, and each one was more impossible than the last. "Command, this is Outpost 7, crackled through the communication system. We engaged a Veltar patrol yesterday, lost 12 soldiers to their blade weapons, but they all kept fighting for over an hour before medical evacuation. The toxins aren't working like they used to." Jay studied the reports on his screen. Similar stories were coming from every occupied world. Humans who should have died were surviving. Humans who should have been broken were fighting back. Most strange of all, they seemed to be getting better at surviving each attack. On the occupied world of New Busan, Corporal Naam Su led a small team through the underground tunnels beneath the city. They had been fighting the Veltar for 3 months, and something had changed in all of them. Nam Su had taken a blade across her arm during their first encounter. The wound had healed, but it had left her with something unexpected. "Contact ahead," she whispered into her communicator. 3 Veltar soldiers, standard patrol formation. Her team moved into position. They had learned to fight the aliens in ways that seemed impossible. The biotoxins that had once paralyzed humans within seconds now barely slowed them down. Razor-sharp blades that had cut through armor, like paper, were meeting human flesh that somehow refused to give up. Namsu engaged the first alien directly. Its living weapon struck her across the shoulder, the same type of wound that had nearly killed her months ago. This time, her body barely reacted to the toxin. She felt the familiar burning sensation, but her muscles continued to work. Her vision remained clear. "The toxins aren't affecting me anymore," she reported after the brief fight. "It's like my body learned how to fight them." Back in the research facility, Dr. Choi Bin was making his own discoveries. The Veltar had given him access to their medical data, hoping he could explain what they were seeing. What he found shocked him more than his captors. "Your weapons are changing us," he told the lead researcher. "Every time you attack a human, and they survive, their body remembers. It learns, it adapts." The alien scientist's compound eyes focused on him intently. "Adaptation requires generations. Evolution takes millions of years." "Not for humans," Ben replied. "We're doing it in real time. Your bioweapons are triggers, not just weapons. They're making us stronger." Across the galaxy, the Veltar military commanders were filing increasingly desperate reports. The humans were not behaving like any species they had conquered before. Instead of breaking under pressure, they were becoming more dangerous with each passing day. Lieutenant Leda had survived her chest wound from the first attack, and now she led her own resistance cell on New Sol. The abandoned colony had become a fortress of sorts, with humans using the damaged infrastructure to create hidden bases and tunnel networks. "We've lost more ground this month than in the previous 6, she overheard a Veltar commander saying during a raid on their communication center. "Human resistance is not diminishing, it's accelerating." The words filled her with hope. The aliens were scared, and they had every right to be. The humans weren't just surviving their attacks anymore. They were thriving because of them. In the research facility, Yang Ho looked at Dr. Choi Bin with eyes that held a new understanding. "They made a mistake, didn't they? They thought they were killing us, but they were actually making us better." Bin nodded slowly. "The biggest mistake? In their empire's history, they've created something they can't control or understand. They've created humans who can't be conquered." 1 year after the first attack, Dr. Choi Bin stood in an underground laboratory that had been carved out of solid rock. The Resistance had rescued him from the Veltar research facility 2 months ago. What he had discovered since then would change everything humans thought they knew about themselves. "The Veltar bioweapons are triggering rapid evolutionary responses in human DNA," explained to the assembled resistance leaders. Charts and data screens covered the rough stone walls around them. "Each exposure that doesn't kill us creates antibodies, genetic adaptations, and enhanced healing responses." Captain Kim Jae studied the medical data with growing amazement. The numbers seemed impossible, but the evidence was right in front of him. "You're saying they're accidentally making us better at surviving their attacks." "Not just surviving," Ben replied, pulling up another screen of data. "Thriving. The children born during the occupation show healing rates that are 40% faster than normal humans. They have toxin resistance that's off the charts. Their bone density is 30% higher than baseline." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Veltar hadn't just failed to conquer humanity, they had accidentally created something stronger. On the occupied world of New Busan, Sergeant Young Ho moved through the crystalline corridors of a Veltar supply depot. His team followed behind him like shadows, their enhanced bodies moving with impossible stealth. The blade wound that had nearly killed him during the first attack had left him with more than just a scar. It had left him with immunity. "Toxin levels are spiking," his biomonitor warned as they entered the facility's main storage area. "Ignore it," Young Ho whispered back. "My body already knows how to handle it." The air in the depot was thick with biotoxins that should have killed any human within minutes. But Yang Ho's squad moved through it like they were breathing normal air. Their bodies had learned to process the alien chemicals, turning deadly poison into something harmless. "Target acquired," he reported into his communicator. "Their biosensors can't detect us anymore. We're invisible to their detection systems." Veltar guards never saw them coming. The aliens' own weapons had made humans into the perfect infiltrators. Every failed attempt to kill them had taught their bodies new tricks, new ways to survive in hostile environments. Back on New Sol, Lieutenant Lee Da coordinated with resistance groups across 12 different worlds. The underground networks had grown beyond anything anyone had imagined possible. Humans were using their own infrastructure against the occupiers, creating tunnel systems and bunker networks that turned every occupied world into a nightmare for the Veltar. Strike Team 5 reports successful infiltration of the command center, she announced to her staff. Strike Team 7 has disabled their primary communication array. The aliens are losing control. The reports coming in were almost too good to believe. Human resistance cells were operating in environments that should have been lethal. They were surviving in areas flooded with biotoxins, fighting in conditions that would have killed baseline humans instantly.
Now we've lost more ground this month
Than in the previous 6, intercepted Veltar communications confirmed. Human resistance is not diminishing. It's accelerating. In the Veltar High Command, panic was beginning to set in. Their perfect conquest machine was failing for the first time in their 1,000-year history. The humans were not just refusing to die. They were becoming stronger with each battle. Corporal Nam Su led a raid on a Veltar processing facility on New Daegu. Her team consisted entirely of second-generation resistance fighters, humans who had been children when the occupation began. They moved through the facility like ghosts, their enhanced senses allowing them to detect alien movements from incredible distances. The children are even more adapted than we are, she reported to command. They can see in complete darkness. Now, their reaction times are 3 times faster than normal humans. It's like they were born to fight these things. The young fighters with her seemed to anticipate the aliens' movements before they happened. Their bodies had developed in an environment of constant threat, and they had become something new, something the Veltar had never encountered before. Dr. Choi Bin received tissue samples from resistance fighters across the galaxy. What he found in his analysis was beyond anything he had expected. The cellular regeneration isn't just faster, he explained to Captain J. It's targeted. Human bodies are literally learning to anticipate and counter Veltar weapon systems. Data showed that human DNA was rewriting itself in real time. Each encounter with Veltar bioweapons left genetic markers that were passed on to the next generation. The aliens had accidentally triggered an evolutionary arms race, and humanity was winning. Look at these blood samples, Bin continued, pointing to microscopic images on his screen. The white blood cells are actively hunting down Veltar toxins. They're not just resisting the poison anymore, they're destroying it. On occupied worlds across the galaxy, the tide was turning. Humans who had been driven underground were emerging stronger than ever. The Veltar found themselves facing an enemy that learned from every battle, adapted to every weapon, and grew stronger with each passing day. The aliens had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that all species would break under enough pressure. They had never encountered a species that was forged by pressure, shaped by adversity, and made stronger by everything that tried to destroy it. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The hunters had become the hunted. The Veltar were beginning to understand that they had awakened something they couldn't control. Veltar Empire's greatest weapon had become their greatest nightmare. Bioweapons were no longer killing humans. Instead, they were creating something the aliens had never seen before in their 1,000 years of conquest. Dr. Choi Ben worked in his underground laboratory, surrounded by equipment salvaged from destroyed colonies. The data on his screen showed something that should have been impossible. Human bodies were evolving not over millions of years, but in real time, adapting to each new threat within weeks. The cellular regeneration isn't just faster now, he reported to Captain Kim J through their secure communication link. It's targeted. Human bodies are literally learning to anticipate and counter Veltar weapon systems before they're even used. On New Sol, Corporal Nam Su led a team of what the Resistance called second-generation fighters. These were humans who had been children during the initial invasion, and they moved through the alien-controlled city like supernatural beings. Their enhanced senses could detect Veltar movements from incredible distances. Toxin levels are critical, her biomonitor warned as they entered a section of the city that had been flooded with deadly chemicals. "Turn that thing off," she told her tech specialist. "My body's already adapted to whatever they're using." The young fighters with her seemed to exist in a different world than baseline humans. They could see clearly in complete darkness. Their reaction times were so fast that they appeared to move before the aliens even attacked. Most incredibly, they could breathe air that would have killed their parents within minutes. "Contact ahead," whispered Li Min, the youngest member of her team. At 16, he had spent more than half his life under Veltar occupation. 3. Aliens, standard patrol formation. They're using the new bioweapons, the ones that were supposed to be impossible to survive. Namsu smiled grimly. Those weapons worked for about 2 weeks before we adapted to them. Let's show them what evolution looks like. The brief fight was over before the Veltar knew what hit them. Their newest, most deadly bioweapons had no effect on the human fighters. The aliens' confusion was visible in their compound eyes as they fell. Meanwhile, in the Veltar High Command, panic was spreading through their ranks. Field reports painted a picture of an impossible war against an enemy that grew stronger with each battle. The humans are no longer responding to any of our pacification protocols, reported Field Commander Zethkar. We have deployed our most advanced bioweapons, including the ones that destroyed the Krell Empire. The humans absorbed 3 direct hits and continued fighting. The Veltar had tried everything. Orbital bombardment only drove the humans deeper underground, where they built even more complex tunnel networks. Atmospheric processors designed to make planets uninhabitable were countered by humans who somehow learned to process toxic air. Even their most deadly bioweapons were now being neutralized by human immune systems that adapted faster than new toxins could be developed. Lieutenant Lee Da coordinated resistance operations from a command center built inside an asteroid. Jar body bore the scars of dozens of battles, but each scar represented a victory over a weapon that could no longer hurt her. Liberation command to all units, she broadcast across the resistance network. Phase 3 is approved. Every occupied world, every resistance cell, every human still breathing. Today we take back what's ours. The response was immediate. Across 37 worlds, human resistance cells launched coordinated attacks on Veltar facilities. But these weren't the desperate suicidal attacks of the early resistance. These were surgical strikes by beings who had been transformed by war into something the aliens couldn't understand or counter. On New Busan, Sergeant Yang Ho led an assault on the primary Veltar command center. His squad moved through defenses that should have been impenetrable. Biotoxin clouds that would have killed armies had no effect on them. Energy weapons that could cut through battleship armor barely scratched their enhanced skin. This is impossible, a captured Veltar officer said through its translator. Your species should have been extinct within the first month of occupation. Yang Ho looked down at the alien with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of 2 years of evolutionary pressure. You made one mistake. You assumed we were like every other species you've conquered. You thought if you hurt us enough we'd break. Instead, you taught us how to be unbreakable. Dr. Choi Ben received reports from resistant cells across the galaxy. The data was staggering. Humans were operating in environments that would have been instantly lethal to their ancestors. They were surviving in the vacuum of space for short periods. Their enhanced healing was allowing them to recover from injuries that should have been permanently crippling. The children born during the occupation are showing abilities that border on the supernatural, he reported to the resistance leadership. Enhanced strength, speed, toxin immunity, and healing rates that are 10 times faster than baseline humans. The Veltar haven't just failed to conquer us. They've accidentally created a new subspecies of humanity. Implications were staggering. The Veltar had wanted to add humanity to their empire as conquered slaves. Instead, they had forged humanity into something that could not be conquered, could not be broken, and could not be stopped. As reports of successful strikes poured in from across human space, one thing became clear. The war was entering its final phase, and the Veltar were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey of a species that had learned to turn every wound into strength, every attack into adaptation, and every battle into evolution. The final battle began at dawn on New Sol, where the war had started 3 years ago. Captain Kim Jae stood at the edge of the crystalline fortress that had once been the colony's main habitat dome. His body carried the scars of countless battles, wounds that should have killed him but had instead made him stronger. This is for everyone we lost. He spoke into his communicator as human forces converged on the Veltar command center from all directions, and for everyone we're going to save. The fortress rose before them like a living mountain, its bioorganic walls pulsing with alien energy. The Veltar had concentrated their most deadly weapons here, preparing for humanity's final assault. They had learned to fear the humans, but they still didn't understand what they were truly facing. Sergeant Yang Ho led the first wave of attackers through the fortress's outer defenses. The biotoxin clouds that billowed from the walls would have killed entire armies 3 years ago. Now his squad breathed the poisonous air as if it were nothing more than morning mist. Toxin levels are off the charts, reported his technical specialist, checking her instruments. Good, Yang Ho replied, his enhanced lungs processing the deadly chemicals and turning them harmless. It means we're getting close to their command. Center. The Veltar defenders fell back in confusion as the human forces advanced. Their most advanced weapons, the ones that had conquered dozens of worlds, were useless against beings who had evolved beyond their ability to harm. Energy blades that could cut through battleship armor barely scratched human skin that had learned to harden under attack. Lieutenant. Lida coordinated the orbital assault from her command ship, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to process information at impossible speeds. The radiation levels in space around the fortress would have been lethal to baseline humans, but her body had adapted to environments that would kill most living things. All stations. This is Liberation Command, she announced across the fleet. Communication network. The fortress shields are down. Okay, begin final approach. Through the ship's viewports, she could see the battle raging on the planet's surface. Humans moved through the alien defenses like forces of nature, their enhanced bodies performing feats that defied every law of biology the Veltar understood. Inside the fortress, Corporal Namsu and her team of second-generation fighters moved. Through corridors filled with every toxic substance the aliens could produce. The young soldiers who had grown up during the occupation seemed to exist in a different reality than their enemies. The air composition is changing, reported Li Min, the youngest member of her squad. They're releasing something new. Namsu smiled grimly. Let them try. Our bodies will figure it out in a few minutes. True to her words, the new bioweapon had no effect on the human fighters. Their enhanced immune systems analyzed the threat and developed countermeasures faster than the aliens could deploy new toxins. Each breath made them stronger. Each exposure taught their bodies new tricks. Dr. Choi Bin monitored the battle from the medical bay of the command ship, watching readings that would have been impossible 3 years ago. The humans fighting in the fortress were operating at levels that exceeded every known limit of their species. Heart rates are stable despite toxin exposure that should be instantly fatal, he reported to the command staff. Cellular regeneration is accelerating in real time. They're literally evolving as they fight. The Veltar Command Center had become a place of desperate confusion. Their perfect conquest machine was failing completely for the first time in their empire's history. The beings they had tried to exterminate were proving to be unlabile. Withdrawal protocols are failing, reported a Veltar tactical officer. The humans are blocking all escape routes. The alien commander studied the battle reports with growing horror. Every weapon they deployed was countered within minutes. Every defense they erected was overcome by beings who seemed to adapt to any challenge. Humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating that conquest of their species was impossible. Yang Ho's squad reached the heart of the fortress, where the Veltar leadership had made their final stand. The alien commander faced them with weapons that represented the pinnacle of their military technology. Energy weapons that could destroy planets, biotoxins that had wiped out entire civilizations. Nothing worked. How is this possible? The commander asked through its translator, watching in disbelief as its most deadly attacks had no effect on the human soldiers. You taught us, Yang Ho, replied simply. Every time you tried to kill us and failed, you made us stronger. Weapon you used against us became something we could survive. You created us. The alien's compound eyes showed something that might have been understanding, or perhaps terror. Your species should have been extinct within the first month. That's what everyone thinks, Young Ho said. But you made one mistake. You assumed we were like every other species you've conquered. You thought if you hurt us enough, we'd break. Instead, you taught us how to be unbreakable. The final surrender came not with a great battle, but with a simple transmission from the Veltar High Command to every military unit in human space. All forces withdraw immediately. The humans cannot be conquered. They do not break. They do not yield. They emerge stronger from every battle. As the last alien ships fled human space, Captain J stood in the ruins of New Sol, watching the sun rise over a world that had been transformed by war. The humans had not just survived, they had become something new, something that could not be conquered by any force in the galaxy. The war was over, but its legacy would last forever. Humanity had proven that some species don't just endure adversity, they are forged by it.